and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week, ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I am Darth Daniel, and this is another bonus pod this week to help during this period of comics and quarantine. We have longtime Brokette member, and I think second appearance on the podcast last time was about 2.5 years ago when Kelli was delivering and recovering from little Leo. And coming back on the podcast is John on Instagram at John2Chips. Welcome back, sir.
What's up, guys? How y'all doing?
All doing well. Some of us quarantined, and I think some of the Brokette core members still working, which is awesome. Get it while you can. And John, to anyone that needs a little bit of background context for him, you work in the comic book industry as well through a shop, right?
That's correct. Yes, here in Texas, we have the only store here in my area. So yeah, I've been working there for about almost 4 years now.
So you went through something very similar that all comic shops went through, and that is the forced closures in your area too, in your county?
Right. Yes, sir. We actually closed right before the last week of new comics that were supposed to be delivered.
Yeah, that's a tough blow then. So you didn't get the final shipment of New Comic Book Day.
Well, actually, we did. We got them. I think we were able to somehow get them to our normal pull customers, but we still have like the wall books, the rest of the books that were supposed to be on the wall left to sell.
Gotcha. Well, that's good. At least you got to somehow get the books out in some way. We kind of find ways to innovate that in this industry, especially.
Right. I mean, we have been slowing down since this, coronavirus thing has been going on, but we've been surviving. Our boss is really tenacious about, getting things done and knowing how to get the product out to the people.
Absolutely. And something that John messaged me about on today's episode is we've heard tons of coronavirus quarantine, and he wanted to make this episode, and I totally agree, kind of on the more fun side, try to distract everyone from that world out there and really talk about collections, collectibles, and especially your collection, since we do feature yours pretty often here as a Patreon backer. Huge thanks, John. But when they head straight to your Instagram, they see a lot of the original artwork. The most envious that I am of yours is the original Bruce Timm pieces that you have, which are absolutely incredible. So I think that's what we're mainly going to focus on today and kind of keep it positive and fun. Sure.
That sounds good. Yeah. I have been collecting, comics since, roughly 1985. I haven't really gotten to the high-end stuff until, around 2003 or 4, somewhere around there, and purchasing like original artwork and stuff, a little after that. I haven't really been as heavy into that lately, but I still try to pick up the nice book every once in a while.
Some of the stuff you put up there, kind of like even the original pages from Hush, are massive. Do you typically get these at conventions, or do you work out art deals through independent sellers online?
Usually it's online stuff. Like Jim Lee has his own representative. He's out of New York, and he represents a lot of different artists, including Bruce Timm and the late Darwin Cook, Amanda Connor, and people like that.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that. So this particular representative can really move a lot of pieces from some of the big names without needing to go directly to the source.
Well, these artists don't have enough time to sell their art online. They're busy with their own careers and stuff, so they have somebody else that does it for them. So that's a lot of the big name artists will do.
I think some of the ways that we can get into the background on your extensive collection is through the Brokette Core, who submitted a number of questions through our Discord. And we're going to start off with Bobby's, because he kind of goes into some of your the curiosity behind some of your origin, some of your favorite stuff. And he's on Twitter at Cuban Slim. His first question is, What is your favorite book and why? I'm assuming he's talking more. Let's handle this as more like your favorite story arc in comic books, since we will have some questions later on actual specific pieces.
Okay. Oh, that's a tough one because I'm into so many different things. I'm a huge Darwin Cook fan, so I really love the New Frontier. I love a lot of Batman stories. I think my favorite is like The Long Halloween. It's probably my best favorite Batman story. So those two. I don't know. If you're talking about like a favorite issue or something that I have. I mean, I've got certain single issues that are more important to me just because of when I first purchased them.
Yeah, there are some questions of that for example Shane and Bobby do ask, but yeah, for the first one I think they were mainly talking about favorite stories, and New Frontier is amazing. You talked about the Long Halloween. How did you feel about the Dark Knight movie by Christopher Nolan when that released, since it did have so many influences from the Long Halloween?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool, especially like the mob underworld storyline. And I just loved all the little nuances of that and how they intricated into the Nolan verse.
It's kind of neat to see some of those things leap into the big screen and go up in live action. I know I felt that same way when, for example, BVS, when you see that armored suit that you see in The Dark Knight Returns, and it's pretty incredible where you think like you never thought you'd see that day, and then suddenly you're sitting there watching things on the big screen from Nolan or Snyder or even in the animated universe, and it's really really neat to see when they take the source material and use that as inspiration.
Right, and as a comic fan, it's something special when you see something that not the average moviegoer would think, that doesn't really read the comics. Just those little hints and Easter eggs that only comic readers would see.
And Bobby has another question here. What is your gem in your collection and why?
Well, let's see. Comic wise or art wise?
Let's do one of each.
Comic book wise, I mean, as far as if we're talking value, it's probably my Detective Comics 168. It's the first appearance of the Red Hood.
Nice.
When they did the Joker origin for the first time in detail. So yeah, that one's really shot up in value since I purchased it about 12 years ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Art wise, that's a tough one. I mean, that you mentioned the Jim Lee page. I'm pretty sure that's pretty high dollar. I don't really know how to price the original art because it's a guide per se. You kind of have to see what the market's doing online, but I haven't really checked lately on what that's cost. Also, I think one of my favorite pieces is the Bruce Timm Harley Quinn pinup that I have.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
So yeah, those are probably my favorites. If we're going to like sentimental value, as far as what comics mean a lot to me that I purchased over the years, were some of the first ones I picked up. I have a Batman 400 that's signed by like 7 different artists that worked on that book, including Bernie Wrightson, who's no longer with us, George Perez, Steve Rude. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few, but Bill Sienkiewicz, maybe. Yeah, I think he's on there too. But just to name a few of those. Also, around that time, I was picking up like the new Justice League, the Justice League International, just kind of the wahaha, Justice League, and that meant a lot to me. That those first 5 to 10 issues of that book, plus the Wally West Flash run was really great.
And I'm glad you answered that one about the sentimental pieces in your collection. That was actually one of the questions by Shane on Twitter at S_Miller_27. And just to touch on some of the things you talked about here, yeah, you're absolutely right about the appraisal of a lot of these items. I pretty often have customers that come in with a piece, and we don't do appraisals at all in the store because it ends up creating this situation that can end up biting you in the ass later. But that's one of the things where someone's like, hey, I have this and it's signed, and it's like, all right, cool. Does it have a certificate of authenticity? No. Okay, well, doesn't really mean anything. But when it does have one, it's even harder. Let's say it is a piece I want to buy and it has a
Yeah.
certificate of authenticity. It's worth as much as whatever the last person paid for it on eBay. And even then, you can't find that exact item anyway. So, yeah, I can totally relate with you saying that some of these things are near impossible to appraise and to even put a price on.
Exactly, because they're one of a kind items, and there's not 100,000 copies or whatever out there. So you just kind of have to see something similar. Have to find something similar what it's going for.
And another question from Bobby is, do you display your books or are they all tucked away in a box? I have a feeling it's both, isn't it?
Well, as far as artwork goes, I display a few pieces. Of course, that Harley piece is framed and on my wall. I've got some Alex Frost prints. I've got a Darwin Cook page on the wall. I've got a Jerry Robinson print on the wall. But all my comics, I'm pretty cautious with them. I keep them in boxes just for safety reasons. I don't want the light in my comic room kind of gets bright in the morning, so I don't want to get them exposed to too much sunlight.
Mm-hmm. Do you do the same thing or do you actually recommend for collectors if you have your, more prized comic books like the Silver Age stuff that's not in Mylar bagged and board, do you recommend changing out regular bags and boards every 5 to 10 years, or do you typically go a bit longer on some of your more key issues?
I would always recommend using something like Mylar or Mylights. I think they're a little more safe from the elements. But I would recommend, if you can't afford to do all of them, I would recommend at least every 5 to 8 years. I would recommend changing them out.
Someone that I've had on the show in the past is Treasure Hunting Sonic, and he has a very similar display to what you have where, he's got the art prints on the wall. He's got some original comic book pages from Sonic the Hedgehog framed up and everything. He's got statues and figurines, figures, everything. And he takes great pride in showing that off to, fellow Sonic collectors and the like. Do you have something similar to anyone that you do know, like maybe your fellow comic shop workers, or is it something that you mainly display for yourself?
It's mainly for me. I mean, I have some friends that I met through the comic shop. They've been over to my house a few times and seen my collection. I don't know if really, other than my boss has seen a few of my pieces, but other than that, pretty much in my house all the time.
You had mentioned buying some of these pieces through certain agents and contacts, but Bobby wants to know if you have any relatable stories that you would like to share regarding an artist or writer or creator that has always stuck with you, and whether you met them at conventions or as you bought pieces from them even.
Let's see. Well, one of my very first published pages that I bought was at a convention. I met Tony Harris, who did Starman. He also did this series with Brian K. Vaughan called Ex Machina. And I bought my first page from that series from him. And so it was kind of you always remember that first item that you purchased. So that's kind of what I remember, meeting him and talking to him about it, and just letting him know how much I appreciated his artwork.
Do you still have those same experiences at conventions where you walk up to an artist or a writer, someone in the industry, and you're thinking in your head, all right, what am I going to ask them? And you try to figure out that thing that they haven't heard a million times, or have you been doing this for so long that you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to tell them I appreciate their work and move on.
Yeah, I don't get too long-winded with the people, because I know they've talked to people, all day long, and if they want to engage me, then I'll stay with them a little longer and chat with them about what I appreciate about the art and things like that. Because I want the next person in line to get their opportunity to meet the artist or writer or whatever.
One of the artists, one of the greats, I guess you can say, is modern greats is Neil Adams. And I'm always
Hmm.
fascinated by the interactions that people have with him because it's either,
Uh-huh.
a positive or a negative. And I've had one of each with
Right.
him. Have you ever
Have you?
met Neil and what was your experience like?
Yes. Actually, I met him for the first time at San Diego. I went to San Diego in 2006 and 2008. He had his own booth there, of course, and uh, I had brought like my Batman. I think it's 232. We'll get him to sign that one, the first Ra's al Ghul. And he was at that time he wasn't charging for autographs like he is now. So he was busy talking to somebody, but I just brought it up to his table, and he signed it. Kind of pointed to it because I had it previously signed by Julius Schwartz and Dick Giordano. So he was kind of impressed that I actually met them too.
Mhm.
So that was pretty special meeting him because he's probably one of my top three artists of all time. So yeah, and then I don't know if I really ever had a negative experience with him. I met him at a show in Dallas one time, and he was just kind of I don't know if he say full of himself, but he was just like, give me, ask me any questions, ask me who my favorite person art, character is to draw, and I said, I don't know about that, but tell me about your experience with Carmine Infantino because I met him one time too, and he said he was just kind of I wouldn't say cantorious person, but he's more of a just a different type of individual because he was important in that time around the early '70s or late '60s. He was more into the Jim Lee role is today because more of a creative officer instead of a full-time artist with a team.
Mhm.
I remember talking about that, but it was pretty short. I have had negative experiences with other people, but Neil is both of them are pretty positive.
Okay, that's good because I'm always curious about that myself. Is there an artist or writer, this is just a question for me, that you
Uh-huh.
haven't met yet that you're waiting and keeping an eye on convention lists for that you're kind of like,
Mhm.
all right, I
Uh,
definitely want to meet them at some point before I go or before they go?
oh yeah, there's a writer I really want to meet. My probably one of my favorite writers right now is Jeff Lemire. I just love all his stuff. Anything he writes, I'll pick up because right now Ascender is probably one of my top favorite books that are hopefully still being published, along with this Black Hammer stuff. So I really want to meet him. Trying to think if there's anybody else, but that he's the top one that comes to mind.
Yeah, Jeff Lemire is huge with the Brokette core. Every time I look on the Twitter timeline, any Brokette core member that I'm following, it's Jeff Lemire. Like they absolutely adore him, and he's seems to be one of the bigger indie writers out there even now. He seems to have his finger in everything.
Yeah, yeah. I recently purchased. He did a 6-issue series for this TKO company that is called series is called Sentient,
Yeah.
and so I ordered that. It's on its way, and they're doing a really cool thing for comic shops. They're donating 50% of their proceeds to the comic shop of your choice
Yeah,
from your purchase.
TKO Studios was one of the first indie publishers to come forward and support local comic stores, and they quickly followed, Dark Horse and IDW, Archie, Image, all the indie publishers that really stepped up and said, "Hey, here's how we're going to help out the lifeblood of the industry." And TKO has still been pushing almost every single day, a
Mhm.
new post or a story post pushing that 50% deal. So TKA Studios is awesome. If you haven't tried out any of their books, definitely go to, I think it's tkostudios.com. I'll put a link in today's episode, but they've got some independent work. And if you need recommendations, I'm sure John has some. And if not, the Brokette core members I know have definitely picked some up already.
Yeah, this will be my first book from them. So I'm not really sure how good it's going to be, but it's Jeff Lemire, so it can't be too bad.
Exactly. And staying on the comic shop talk, Spoon Sandwich asks, quote, I'm curious for you guys to compare and contrast things about your respective stores. Are they set up similarly? Does his move a ton of something that you guys rarely sell much of? That kind of stuff, end quote. So is there anything in your store in particular that you would say outside of the comics that that are a big part of your end of day sales?
Sports cards. We have a big sports card part of the store. It's probably about a third of our store. I would say that they're definitely the part because we have also vintage toys and stuff, but they move erratically. But cards, people are always coming in buying boxes of the new tops or Panini or whatever.
Yeah, I always have customers come in and they'll have a baseball collection or a basketball collection of cards.
Hmm.
And it happens almost every single week where they're like, hey, do you know where I can sell these? Do you know where I can? And well, they never ask that right away. They always ask, "Hey, do you guys deal in sports cards?" And I say, "No, but Target down the street. Target's the closest shop that carries sports cards in my area." So I'm always like, "Yeah, they carry that stuff." Oh, well, actually, I'm looking to sell it, and I'm like, "Oh, I have no idea." Seems like everyone is looking to sell sports cards and not buy. Is it my misconception that the sports card industry is not what it was, or is it still something that's very lucrative for stores?
I don't think it's the same as it was back in the '90s when they were overproducing cards. We get a lot of people, like you say every week, but we see it like every day or at least every other day. We'll have people bringing in stuff, and sometimes it's really good stuff. That's on a rare occasion, but most of the time it's the overproduced stuff that we have just tons of. And I've had people bring them in, and all the cards are not stacked together, just all thrown in there like they're throwing it away or something. It's all jumbled up. It's just it's crazy what we'll see people bring in sometimes. But I think the market's pretty good because there's more than just the card. They have now that people hunt for. So it's still a lucrative market right now.
That reminds me of the comic collections that I see come in, and I'm sure you get that too, where it's like, hey, I've got Superman '1, and I'm like, okay, we're looking for Silver Age comics from the '60s and early '70s. Yeah, I've got that. And then it's a short box of books from the '80s and '90s and early Image, and I'm like, yeah, no, not so much of this. It's not '60s.
Yeah, we get a lot of that with people that call in and will say, well, what's the cover price on it? If it's nothing that's 15, 25 or 15 or 12 cents, if it's something that says $1 or more, we know it's just stuff that we not really looking for. It's kind of what we consider junk.
Right. Yeah. And usually they end up showing up anyway, but every now and again, maybe there's a key issue there that it's like, oh, you know what? I can use a Spawn #1 and throw, $20 on it and move it off the wall. But most of the time, yeah, you're right. It is junk or stuff that we already have way too much of. And you said you sell a lot of action figures as well.
Yeah. We sell a lot of, the DC Direct or DC collectible stuff. Plus we buy the vintage '80s stuff like He-Man, Transformers, Star Wars, the original Star Wars stuff, Thundercats, or maybe the Power Rangers toys. People still like to buy the Power Rangers toys from the '90s.
A couple of weeks back, I interviewed Bernie Gonzalez, who mentioned the closure of the Toys R Us stores. And I don't really deal too much in action figures in my store just because it's not really, we'll carry what moves and action figures have never really been it for this particular area. But have you noticed an uptick in sales since Toys R Us closed?
To be honest with you, not a whole lot. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the problem is not that many people are looking for it unless it's that rare figure. People come out from all over the state looking for our vintage stuff because they see our stuff online. We know we carry old Star Wars or Transformers or stuff. But like the newer stuff, it's hit or miss. I mean, our Pops are probably the biggest toy seller right now, I guess. We get a whole lot on the newer stuff, and people come in looking for it.
That's something that the owner has noticed over the years is that the problem with action figures, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, is that the stuff right now from DC Direct or Marvel Select, Marvel Gallery, are that the action figures are in that $30 plus price range. And there aren't those action figures that hit that, $9.99 mark through comic stores at least, kind of like we used to have, growing up. And that's the stuff that it's like, well, since that action figure doesn't exist in this market right now for whatever reason, the Funko Pops have instead become that action figure for a lot of people. And that's what I've noticed. It's not a matter of kids are entertained with digitally, digital games or video games. It's the fact that they're buying Funko Pops and not action figures.
Exactly. I think you hit the nail right on the head, because I can't believe some of these figures we get start out at $24.99 or $29.99. I don't see anybody buying those except for like the Dragon Ball Z figures or any kind of anime based figure, and I've seen people come in and buy that stuff, and I was like, wow, where do you get the money for that? Usually people don't buy anything priced that high. So it's interesting to see what people will buy.
Absolutely. You can never guess either as you're ordering something and then suddenly it's like, oh shit, that actually moved.
Right.
And then the thing that you're like, we're going to sell 8 of these, and then you have 7 of them a year later. It's like, you can never tell. One of the things that I'm curious to see if you saw and kind of were uplifted by were those final weeks before the store's closure. Did you see like that uprise in, the subs or regulars in your customer base that were like, you know what, I need to buy a gift certificate. I don't want to see you guys go. Now, what can we do to help? Did you see something similar in your community?
Not really. I know we're trying to interact with people on Facebook right now. We're doing like video almost every day of the week. At least my manager is, and then one of the other workers. And people are like, "Are y'all open, or can we still buy stuff?" And so we're trying to do the curbside still. People can still pick up stuff, or we do delivery. So that's kind of the main thing we're doing right now to keep afloat. Plus our online sales.
Well, that probably helps then, since they know that they can still get the stuff online or curbside, and it's not a matter of, oh shit, they're going to close and I can't get anything from them. That might be why, where they're like, well, I can still get the stuff online. So that's definitely a huge advantage for your shop, I think.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, our other store, our gaming store, also has a cafe in it, so they can stay open. So people always have a place to go to pick up stuff, even if somebody's not at the shop that I work at.
Are you currently quarantined as well from the store, or do they have you assisting with some of the curbside and online?
No, I'm quarantined. I did the furlough type deal where I still get my unemployment.
Gotcha. Much like many Brokette core members out there. And I've been getting this question a lot as far as, what are you reading? What kind of trades would you recommend? Which I've been answering on the podcast over the last couple of weeks and also on Twitter and Instagram. So I am right now spent on recommendations, aside from constantly repeating Superman Red Sun, because I'm trying not to give the recommendations that I have given like over the years. I'm trying to, come up with new stuff like Teen Dog, which I really liked. And, we just talked about Harley Quinn Breaking Glass. So I'm not going to say Court of Owls or Red Sun for the 18th time. So instead I'll focus on you, who does read more on the independent market. Sometimes I get chastised by John, like, hey, where's your indie books? And I'm like, oh shit. So what would you recommend right now for the Brokette core members to get or to read, or new comic book day to you comic book day for them to catch up on?
Yeah, well, I would definitely recommend a bunch of Image stuff that I've read over the years. Right now, I said Ascender was my favorite book. I love the Jeff Lemire, Dustin Nguyen combo, and I would recommend them reading the Descender series first, which is 6 volumes. And I've always tried to get people hooked on that book, and it's only $10 for the first volume, so it's a good price to get your feet wet on. Plus, I like anything from Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. The Criminal series is really good. They did a series called Fatale, was really good. If you're into that noir type stuff, this really hits it good. Black Hammer is another Jeff Lemire series from Dark Horse. That's really good. I just finished reading a series from Kieran Gillian, the Die series from Image.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're into like Dungeons and Dragons or kind of role playing, you'd really get into this series because it kind of deals with these characters who get sucked into this world. They're doing like a role playing, Stranger Things type of deal. It's pretty interesting. The artwork's great too.
There you go. Some recommendations from John. Whether your comic shop is open right now and can do some curbside or regular delivery, make sure to check in with them, and that's a way you can support them. Or when your local comic shop eventually opens, that's another. You have a list now ready that you can order through them or have them order in for you. Since new comics won't be immediately delivered as soon as they open, it's going to be a slow uphill process. And speaking of that eventual opening and when the books go back to print, what kind of changes do you want to see or do you expect from the publishers out there? What do you want to see them do when they return?
Well, I think you would be on board with this was if Marvel would do a returnable.
It's fucking insane. They still won't announce that. I'm like, DC's
I know.
I'm like, as soon as DC's done it, okay, that'll set the. But no, they don't care, man. They really don't. And some of the people do accuse me of like, you're anti-Marvel because of the movies, and I'm like, that's a whole different argument and division right there. If you work in the industry, you understand the abusive practices that go on. So this and this is a perfect clear example. This is just one of those things that it's like. We ask for one thing is returnability. And that's literally it. If you guys want to, not give us the discounts, the extended discounts or whatever, that's fine. But the returnability is everything. And they just won't do it. And it's really bizarre.
Yeah. Plus the FOCs that I do, have to order so many copies of each book just to get a certain variant and all that kind of stuff. It's insane what Marvel does. It really is. And I hope we see some change in Diamond. If not, have another company come in and do some distribution. I think some competition might help, with the market.
Yeah, if something does come out of that and a different distributor rises up, I think that would be good. And I know that DC is looking at different printers right now, and who knows if something comes out of that, and if in fact there is a different distributor, or if these companies decide to make their own distribution model again. But talking about the incentive variants, John, I stopped playing that game. I'm like, you know what? If we hit the incentive, great. But if we don't, I'm not going to order an extra 20 copies just to pad Marvel's numbers to get one variant that I might sell. It's just kind of one of those things that after years of it, I'm like, no, man, I'm done getting, stuck with 20 copies of a book that's going to go in overstock. And then they end up still, giving us a half extra copy of, oh, you ordered 20 copies of Runaways? Well, here's an extra 10 copies of this book that you're not going to move anyway. It's like, give me if you're going to double my orders or whatever, do it on a book that is actually going to be movable, not on freaking Runaways or Savage Avengers.
That drives me insane. I hate it. I cut something on purpose so he wouldn't be stuck with it, and they send us another 10, 15 copies. It's like, come on.
And people are like, well, you're not paying for those extra copies. It's like, no, but we are paying on labor for getting rid of them, labor for putting them away. It takes up space, and we're paying for the extra weight in shipping. So it is, in fact, costing us.
Yep. It sure is.
It's crazy, man. It's cool that I get to talk to someone that does FOCs as well. This is a rare occurrence on my end. Do you have any other type of topics that you wanted to cover before we end up closing out with the Brokette core members, as far as the quarantine or as far as the industry, or any questions you might have?
Well, we could talk about comic grading a little bit. I know
Yes, that's right.
I think that's one thing we've thought about. I don't know if you have a few graded comics in your collection. Mine's been growing over the years. I probably have 100. Let's see, probably 150 to 200 graded books right now. All of them are pretty much vintage books from the from the 70s and older down to the 40s. Most of them are CGC. I have like one PGX book and one or two CBCS books, but it's mostly CGC. And I know CGC has had a little bit of a PR problem lately with I don't know if you saw the video of the Superman #1 getting flipped through.
No, tell me.
You haven't seen that? Well, back at C2E2, was it February or was it March? I think it was March. One of the main graders was flipping through a Superman #1 from the 40s, and he was treating it pretty roughly as far as flipping through the pages quickly and bending pages. You really need to check this video. I'm sure it's on YouTube or maybe Instagram or Facebook. You can find it, and it's got a lot of collectors out there in an uproar. It's just the way he was handling the book. Plus, he was not wearing any gloves, and a lot of people were upset about that. I'm not a big proponent about gloves as long as you wash your hands. You're not going to get any residue on the books. So, but as far as the way he was flipping through the books, I would not be flipping through them quite as careless, especially if it's a key book like that.
I'm going to go ahead and I'll definitely check this video out, but I'll take your word for it since you are someone that does handle comics in the industry and you are an avid CGC buyer. But I will say that some of these collectors do go a little bit overboard in as far as when they look at a book, and I get it. They want to be extra careful, and that's totally fine. But someone that has handled books for years, especially someone like a CGC worker, probably knows what the threshold is and what they can do and how they can flip through a book without damaging it at this point. I had a first print copy of TMNT #1. And I graded it, I flipped through it and everything, and I'm like, if some of these collectors would film me and see how I handled it, they would be saying, oh man, he's damaging it, something's happening. I'm like, no, I've just been doing this for so long that I can flip through a book and know that I know how to handle a book to the point where it's not going to get creased, it's not going to get damaged. I never wear gloves for any of this because, as you said, as long as your hands are washed and you're not one of those guys that sweats profusely from his hands, I've seen those. But as long as you're washed your hands and you're fine, then you're not going to leave any fingerprints on any of these books or anything. So I will check out the video for sure, but I also kind of tend to side a little bit on someone that does know how to handle these books and because I know I would be chastised, but I'm like, guys, it's in the same condition that it came in at, I guarantee you. So that's one thing. But yeah, staying on the CGC talk, are there some that you are like, oh, yes, I'm glad that's a 9.8, or you didn't expect that as high a grading that you're more proud of?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been some disappointments and there have been some, highs. I mean, when I got my Strange Adventures 205, which is the first Deadman graded, I was hoping for at least a 7.5, maybe an 8.0, and it came back a 9. So I was really pleased with that. Also, I got my Detective 359, the first Batgirl, regraded because it has some pressable defects that would upgrade, the book, and it came back from an 8 to a 9.0.
Nice.
So those were some of the high points. Recently, I had my first Reverse Flash graded. It was a Flash 139, and I was hoping for at least a 7.75, and it came back a 5.5.
Oof.
Because they counted off. CGC will hammer your grade if you have stains, any kind of little stains or rusty staples. And really, this book, I didn't really see any stains per se, but the inside cover was kind of tanned. So I know that on some of the older books, the white will start tanning on the inside. So maybe that's what brought the grade down. So I don't know.
Have you noticed when I used to do way more CGC than I think the last one I got was a Batman 50 exclusive variant that was exclusive to the shop. And that's the last one that I got graded. And I haven't since. The way I've always handled them is the key issues that I really want that I don't want to change out the bags and boards for. That's what I will get CGC graded, and I'm less concerned with the grade and more concerned with the protection in this portion of my collecting. So that's one reason why I haven't gotten a lot of them. But have you noticed that if it's a more key issue, they'll look at it over much more closely as opposed to something that isn't key that you just want graded? That it's like, yeah, I kind of, if I were to compare these books, I know that key issue is in higher condition, but because it's a key issue, they really looked at it closely and started knocking it out for every little thing.
I don't know if there's any kind of bias on what they grade. I know people have said that golden age issues will get a bigger amount because they're older, and so they'll still get a higher grade, even though they're not as good condition as compared to like a Bronze Age book or a Copper Age book. They'll always get a little bit higher grade because it's an older book, and the paper quality wasn't the same back then as it is in later years.
And one question I get all the time, and I'll let the CGC expert answer it, is from a lot of customers and regulars, is how do I go about getting a book graded? Okay.
Your best bet right now is to do it online. Go to the CGC website, which is cgccomics.com, and they have a form you can fill out online. You set up an account. There's different tiers you can use. You get a bigger discount the bigger membership you get. So right now I have one that's $150 a year, and then they give you that credit to get something graded. They do have a free account, but you don't get any of the discounts or things like that. It'll tell you exactly what each tier does. So I would recommend going to their website.
And I would say also myself is unless you don't care about what book it is and you just want something collected and protected, then that's fine. But I would also recommend only sending in books that are definitely worth more. Probably I'd say double what it costs you already to grade it, which ends up being anywhere between the $25 to $40 range, depending on your membership, depending on what the book is, if it's Silver Age or Golden Age. But that's my other thing is, make sure that it is something, I don't know, I'd say minimum $100 range value is the only thing.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend something like that. You don't want to just do the latest issue that you got off the wall. It's going to be worth $5 raw, down the road. You want to find something that's going to skyrocket in value. I mean, just think like Walking Dead #1, how much that's worth, and because it was just a regular book, and now it was one of the more rarer books because the print run was between 6,000 and 7,000 copies.
Yeah, and that's the key right there to a book actually having potential value to grow over time and actually retaining its value. And unlike, and I don't know if I'm curious to see what you think since you work at a comic shop, the first appearance of Punchline, did that get to you as well, where it's like this frenzy is uncalled for, especially since there's thousands of copies of this issue anyway, so it's never going to be a Walking Dead #1 value, but two, it's a character that hasn't even been developed in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it really blew my mind how people were flocking to this, thinking it's going to be the next Harley Quinn. It says yet to be seen how popular this character is going to be, and it's all speculation. It's been a speculator market the past 2-3 years at least since I've been working there.
Do you have do the speculators kind of ruin a little bit of that for you, where it's like you want to get these books to the readers and not so much to the people just trying to flip something on eBay?
Yeah, it's tough because I want there to be enough copies for people who just want to read it, who want to have it in their collection, aren't there just for the money of it, and it's kind of irritating at times. It kind of wears on you after a while, but it is what it is. We'll deal with it the way we can. We limit our customers when it's a book like that to one per customer, and go from there.
Yeah, that's one thing we ended up doing, I think late last year, is all books are limited to one per person, just kind of doing a blanket, type of limit.
Hmm.
And that, I mean, if they want to get like one of each cover, that's fine. Something like Wolverine #1, which had 18 million covers, and if they wanted to get one of each, that's great. But when they try to pick up multiple copies, and then you start seeing it from some of your regulars, and it's like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you're a reader. Like, but they get caught up in it too. They get caught up in
Hmm.
the hype, and I don't blame them for it. But it's also like, it's not. This is not going to be that big, especially something like Punchline that has thousands of copies. It's never going to be, Batman Adventures, and it's never
Yeah.
going to be Batman Adventures 12, and it's not going to be, because I think there were even less copies of that, and that is a what, maybe $2,000 book, and Harley Quinn has her own. She starred in a live action movie, and the
Yeah.
book
Yeah.
is still, only $2,000. And I say only $2,000, but it's like, this isn't going to be an Action Comics #1 or anything like that. Though the days of those comics are over, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that that book was pretty low print. I'm sure compared to the rest of the stuff that was being published at that days. Those were kid books mainly, so I'm sure it was less than 100,000 copies.
Before we move on from the CGC topic, you had
Hmm.
brought up some of the ones in my collection just because I'm sure someone out there might be curious. Is
Hmm.
Kelli got her first print copy of issue #1 of Saga? She got that CGC graded, and
Hmm.
it's on display in her display case as well. So that's her favorite comic series of all time. She had to get it, and she had to get it graded and protected mainly. That's the main idea. She wasn't concerned about the grade. And then
Yeah.
on my end, same thing. Because I don't have an intention to resell them. And it's not something
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, I need this to be a 9 or an 8.0 at least, because the difference between that and a 7.8 is, $200. I don't follow it that closely, but first
Uh-huh.
appearance of Poison Ivy is one that I ended up getting graded as well. And it's, I don't have to concern myself anymore with changing out the bag and the board. It's done.
Uh-huh.
It's put away, and it's protected from UV lighting as well. So that's one.
Hmm.
And then I think my favorite one in my collection is a Neil Adams. He comes up again. Neil Adams CGC signature grade of the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul, because it is my favorite villain. I bought that off of a convention bot seller that,
Hmm.
this thing has stains. This thing has a little bit of water damage as well. And it came back at a 5 something, like 5 point. I'm like, shit, man, that's way higher than I expected. But I didn't
Yeah.
care. At the time, I was hurting for money, and I
Hmm.
was really looking for this book, right? First Ra's al Ghul, and he had it, and I'm like, you know what, $50, I'll take it. And this was at a time when these Silver Age books and key issues weren't as high in value due to, at the time there weren't TV shows and movies featuring all of these characters every other day. And so that's probably my favorite one. I got it signed by Neil Adams. It was
Uh-huh.
witnessed, and it has the gold labeling and everything. So that's probably my favorite one in my collection at the moment.
That's cool. Yeah. That reminds me another story. I had a book signed by Neil Adams that wasn't supposed to be signed by Neil Adams. Yeah, if you look on my Instagram page, you'll see it's the first Mr. Freeze, and I went to a convention up in Dallas last year. It wasn't a CGC booth, but it was a facilitator. They have certain companies that will get books signed or get them sent off to be graded, because CGC can't be at every convention that's in the country. And my book got put in the stack to be signed by Neil Adams, and I was like, I was a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot agitated that they had gotten it signed, because this book was printed years, probably 8 to 10 years before he even was doing comics, and he should. I mean, I don't know what was going on. I don't know why he signed it. It was crazy. So when I got the book back, I called the guy, and he said, I can give you the book back. You can send the book back to me, and I'll give you the amount we insured it for, or you can keep it. And we kind of went back and forth on that. And then he said, Here, I got an idea. Neil Adams is going to be at a show in a few weeks what if I take the book and get him to sketch something on the cover, and that'll kind of tie his signature into the book. So I started thinking about it, and what he ended up doing was drawing a Mr. Freeze up in the corner. So it really kind of tied it in and made it kind of a unique book.
That's really cool. Yeah, I remember you had mentioned that briefly, but I don't think I'd seen it yet on Instagram. And there's going to be a link in today's show notes, but what is your Instagram so that they can see a lot of these key issues?
It's Johnny2Chips with the number 2.
And that's Johnnny.
Correct.
I've got a couple of questions myself. What is your next key issue that you're going to be hunting for personally?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been on the hunt for a lot of the Jack Kirby Fourth World stuff, his Mr. Miracle and New Gods and Forever People. I've got pretty much all the key issues. There's a few left I need. I'm also maybe looking towards first Wonder Girl. I think it's Brave and Bold 60. That one's kind of tough. Or the first Jonah Hex. I'm looking forward to getting that one maybe. So some of those maybe, or maybe an old detective or Batman that I don't have yet. So,
and from each of the big two, so Marvel and DC, who is your favorite character from each of them and why?
Easily Batman.
Yes.
Batman's he's favorite, all time of everything as far as fictional characters go. Marvel, I'm going to say Wolverine, I guess. I've always liked Wolverine, or maybe Punisher. I like those edgier characters, so I say one of those two.
That's very good, John. And I do also want to give you a personal thanks for not only when you helped cover 2.5 years ago on the podcast and, gave content to the Brokette Core, but once again, you're coming forward and doing the same for this time. It's not for, Papa Kelly and I and then the listeners, but now it's like for everyone out there that, is quarantined, that maybe needs that extra bit of entertainment and that distraction from everything on here. So I do want to say thank you for coming on the show and helping out with that, and also for being a very long time supporter of the podcast.
I appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on the show.
And I want to thank everyone else out there as well for tuning in this week. Is there anywhere else they can find you, John, as far as outside of Instagram?
Right now, I'm not too busy on Twitter, so I wouldn't recommend looking me for there. Instagram is probably the best. I don't really do comic stuff on my Facebook page, so I kind of leave that to my Instagram.
Got it. Very good. So thank you all so much for joining us on today's episode, and a huge thanks to John for coming on the show. I've been Darth Ray Daniel, and John, you can say it with me this week. Brokette Core, all will be
well. Thanks, guys.
So, John, I'm sure you've seen the Jim Lee eBay auctions. Have you been getting knocked down on those? Have you even been trying at any of that original artwork?
No way. I know those are going for buku dollars. There's no way. I'm happy with what I have, so I'll leave it to other people to purchase that.
Let me ask you something. Let's say that to anyone that doesn't know, the person that wins one of those pieces gets to choose what the next artwork is. And so far they've done Batman Beyond, aka Batfake. We've had the Batman Who Laughs. He just put up Wonder Girl. Who would you pick as for him to do the next sketch of? Which DC character?
Harley Quinn.
Yeah, I'm shocked she hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, I'm sure she will. She's got to.